All right, welcome back to another episode of the Christian Sages. Say hi, Doug.
Hello.
So we're continuing with our series where we're discussing different types of religions. Last week we discussed alien worship, and today we're going to talk about science as a religion, which we are not saying that science in itself is a religion, but that scientific theory and science to some people has become a religion. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So as a Christian, and I'm sure Doug would agree with this, there is this view that there is a war between science and religion.
Correct.
And as a matter of fact, a lot of the videos I was looking at when I was doing research on this, most of them are science, from a scientific perspective, from scientists and science teachers and the fake scientist Bill Nye, the fake science guy, that they are the ones that are under attack by religion. When in actuality, what we have found, in particular in the 20th century, that religion has come under attack by science, and most of the aggression is from the scientific standpoint and not from the religious standpoint. I will agree that if you go back to before the Renaissance and the Reformation, that yes, religion probably did attack scientists quite often. But to their defense, scientists wanted to take dead people and cut up their bodies and look and see what was inside of them, and that was very taboo to religious people at the time period. So I can understand why that would seem very extreme to a religious person.
Yeah. Scientists haven't changed much.
No, that is true. They just want to do
Yeah.
human testing, and they test experiment on animals.
Yeah, I think there's important that we understand too that, like you said, there's this false narrative that science and religion are at war, because there should be a differentiation between true science, actual, real science, and sort of religious science, or this naturalism that has risen to explain everything, especially attack God and become sort of the atheism. I like how this one guy put it: atheism dressed up in a lab coat.
That's exactly.
Great day, you all right?
I choked again. I just shouldn't drink while we're doing podcasts. That's what it is.
Yeah, I warned you not to do that. I told you not to choke again.
Well, the thing is, I have a headset mic, and it's really close to my mouth because for some reason it records really softly. I need to get a new mic. So when I got to drink, I either got to move it or try to maneuver it around the mic. And when I'm trying to maneuver it around the mic, I always end up getting it in there wrong and then trying to talk at the same time and coughing. So
use a straw.
It just doesn't work for coffee unless it's dark,
Melt the straw.
Anyway,
so
go ahead.
Science is knowledge of particular subjects, like physics and biology and cosmology and stuff like that, and it deals with repeatable events.
Yes,
which can be preserved under certain conditions, and so it's great. It's valuable. It predicts things. It can improve and save our lives, even.
It is. Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
And it gives factual knowledge, but it does not give ultimate purpose.
No, it does not. Well, I mean, science definition of science, according to Wikipedia, or whatever, Google. The intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. The world of science and technology, for instance. It's the study of science and technology. Through the study of the behaviors of how the physical and natural world works through observation and experimentation. It is also a particular area of science, plural, because it can be a noun. So, for instance, veterinary science. A systematically organized body of knowledge on a particular subject is what you were saying. For instance, the science of criminology. It can also be an archaic knowledge of any kind. His rare science and is practical skills. So, for instance, you can consider the ability to be a carpenter a science. It can be explained as a science, in essence. That's one of the definitions. But you're right.
And I think what we're dealing with is this change in definition, where we used to look at science as what we could experience, or through our five senses, we could explain how the natural world works. And it's
Yeah.
turned into the study of natural explanations with assertions and no evidence given. Just so stories about how things could have happened or just so happened or probably might have happened.
Well, that's where
Millions.
you see. This is where we get into the theoretical physics. Really, most of this is theoretical physics or theoretical science. It is not the same as traditional science. For instance, science is, or scientists only believe in, one scientist that I was studying said, scientists only believe in quantifiable, observable things that they can prove. Modern scientists,
Right.
however, throw in the idea of theory, and they turn theory into fact. So scientists, in essence, only believe in fact. They do have theories, and if they can prove their theory, then their theories become law or fact. And I don't disagree with that per se. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you study statistics, which I don't actually consider statistics math, because statistics can pretty much say whatever you want it to say. There's a way of manipulating the variables to get it to say whatever you want it to say. And you can do the same thing in science. You can come to a conclusion that says what you want it to, and then a scientist across the country could perform the same experiments and come to a completely different observation
Right.
and say something completely different. And it's get to, for instance, global warming, which is a theory. The reason why scientists say it is a fact is because 98% of scientists agree that it's happening. They have no proof it's happening necessarily. All of the proof they have would not stand up in a court of law. For instance, if you were
Right.
trying the government or trying Mother Nature or the government or mankind and saying, mankind, you're creating global warming, and these are the reasons why, it would not stand up in a court of law. You would not be
Right.
able to prove without a reasonable doubt with the evidence that they have in global warming. But 98% of them say that it's global warming, so therefore now it becomes a law. Well, that goes against the very idea of what science is. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Science
Yeah.
has to be proven. So it cannot become a law, it cannot become absolute truth until it can be proven or duplicated. That's what the scientific method is. And that's what science is. It's the study of the natural world and then using experimentation, observation to prove your theories. I mean, I
Yeah.
agree that theory is part of the
It's
scientific process, but it's
yeah. It's interesting what they do is they use their sort of inflated status to politicize issues, like you said, like global warming.
sure.
And it's the irony of it is they're mostly naturalists, and they,
Yeah.
even though life's meaningless and absurd, they still find meaning and purpose by pushing their agenda in the name of science on humanity. So I mean, if we're stardust, what's the big deal if the
Right.
planet heats up and cooks us?
Well,
But
it's
you
the
know,
idea, right? It's the idea that you can't tell somebody that they're an accident, but then they have purpose, that they were designed for a purpose. You
right?
can't do that. You're either one or the other.
Like, why is it a good thing?
Right.
And they can't. They say, well, because I think Bill Nye was a guy I was watching because you were talking so much about him. But he was like, they were like, well, what's the ultimate purpose? Why do you do things if you just live, die, and you're really a monkey and you're Star Wars? Because
Right.
he was saying that we are Martian descendants. He was say, he was saying like
Right.
he said that we are descendants of Martians, that some orbiter hit Mars a long time ago and the dust. It's an extraordinary story, but we could be descendants from them. And he's saying that if you believe you're descendants from Adam and Eve, that's crazy. But to say we're Martians, that's
Yeah, but see,
not
that's
crazy.
the point. It's not crazy to say that you're descended from Martians. Like, honestly, if you were to, even if you were all of these scientists that they hold so dear, Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, probably even Einstein, if they were to have said to them that we are descended from Martians, they would have, instead of Adam and Eve, they would have looked at him and said, "What are you, dumb? Are you
Right,
crazy? Are you stupid? Where did this come from? Where
right.
is this idea? How is that more believable than believing in Adam and Eve?" You know, they also
Yeah,
probably would have been quite appalled. Particularly, a lot of the older ones would have been quite appalled if they would have told them that we evolved from monkeys. They would have looked at him and said, "What are you, crazy? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think all those guys you just said, Galileo, Bacon, and Kepler,
Yeah.
Newton, and Mendel, all those guys. Science is a search for truth. For them, that's what it was.
Yeah.
A search for truth. And
That is
today,
what-
most
right.
scientists begin on level one with a philosophical commitment to naturalism, and
humanism.
it's really
humanism.
misleading if we want the truth
Right.
based on evidence. Science then becomes, in their view, not really a search for truth, but the search for materialistic explanations, and it's a closed system. So if science
That's
is a
true.
search for truth, then God has to be a possibility, and you got to follow the evidence.
But it
wherever
can't be a
leads.
possibility, not because there's a lack of evidence, but because it doesn't agree with their philosophy. Because the reality of it is that, and this is what science as a religion has become. Not the search for truth, but the search for an alternative to what others believe is truth. When you are already predisposed, you cannot have a perfect experiment. You know what I'm saying? You cannot go in and not be, if you are already looking for a specific answer, then it will
Right.
always be tainted. Your experiments will always be tainted by that search for a specific answer.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But if you are going in because you simply want to understand how the universe works, for instance, how the natural universe works, if you're just going in with that idea, then if it leads to God, that's okay. If it leads to creationism, for instance, because whether you believe in the Judeo-Christian God, whether you believe in the Islamic God, which is technically that has its basis in the Judeo-Christian God, whether you believe in a one force that all living things give off, that is the universe, which Buddhists believe. If you believe that there were ancient beings that created everything that then warred amongst themselves, like the Romans and the Greeks believed, and some other pantheonic religions believed, is immaterial, because if it goes to creationism, that there is a creator, then you would follow that naturally and accept that. But if you are trying to disprove that there is a creator, even if your science takes you there, you will not accept that. Because you're not in it to find a truth. You're in it to disprove something others believe. And that's the problem with science. That's why, in a way, it has become a religion. Because if you are approaching it from that standpoint, then you can make the data say whatever you want it to say. That's why statistics, if you approach statistics from the point of trying to prove something, instead of just trying to gather information and see where it leads you, it will be tainted. Because you will taint, you probably took statistics in school, you will then create questions for your samples that are misleading or leading towards the specific answer you want. For instance, they could say that 80% of people want to vote for Hillary Clinton, but if you've ever gotten one of those calls on your phone or had it pop up in your internet nowadays, all of those questions are leading you to choose her. They don't give you an option to not choose her. They'll ask you stuff like, do you agree with Hillary Clinton? Or do you think she's just okay? But there won't be an option on here, you're not voting for her. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because they're trying to lead it towards a specific end. Well, then you cannot take their conclusions as fact, because it's tainted. It's the same with science. You cannot take their conclusions as fact if they're going in it with an already tainted perspectives. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and that's really why do you see so many scientists who are atheists? I think there's like 40% of scientists believe in a God, but of the top scientists, only like 7%. It's really low.
Because, again, it's become a religion. So if you don't agree with their doctrine, you're run out. And there have been tons of movies and articles written about that. If you don't agree with their doctrine and you're a teacher or a scientist, they run you out. And they discredit you. And I mean, that's just it. Naturalism dominates the education system. And it forms really, it doesn't just go into science. It forms the backdrop of all learning, all humanities, And so, and then what you have is their main goal. They have one drive, and it's to explain why they don't need anything else, or to explain why atheism and why they can explain everything through science. Yes.
Even how the universe came into being. And then what they have to do is they have to say the laws which govern the universe had to have an origin. And so where did they originate? They self-generated.
Yes, exactly.
And then you
Which
have what
doesn't
you
make
have is a fate
sense according
that
to scientific
chaos
theory.
produced order and that nothing produced something, and then out of randomness came intelligibility.
It
And
doesn't
that's
make
faith.
sense. Yeah, well,
Right.
and
It's
obviously it
faith
takes
in
faith. Yeah.
a miracle, really.
It is a miracle, and it's a miracle that has no absolute scientific. It doesn't make sense scientifically. Even
Right.
scientists will tell you there have been plenty of scientists that are not afraid to say that. And the reality of it is that creationism makes more sense from a scientific standpoint than their theories that they have come up with. For instance, that the universe is chaotic, something came from nothing, and order came out of chaos by not by design but just by random chance. That doesn't make sense scientifically. It
Right.
doesn't make sense according to the scientific principles, which states you must be able to duplicate it. If it cannot be duplicated, then it isn't science. So then it steps into the realm of theology, and it's no different. It's no different than saying that God created the universe, or saying that the gods created the universe, or that some intellectual, all random force that is generated by all life created the universe. It is the same. It falls into the same realm of, like you said, requiring faith to believe it. So let's
Right.
go. Let's talk about what is a religion. The definition of a religion, according to Google, is the belief in worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. So that I think anybody can say that, and that's where science will be like, well, that's why we're not a religion. But it is also a particular system of faith and worship. It is also a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. So,
Right.
by that standard, a pursuit or interest in which someone ascribes supreme importance, science falls under the category of a religion when it steps out of the realm of just the study of the natural world into the realm of trying to explain the why and the how through theory. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about through truths. Like if you could prove your theory, then I will accept that. But you can't. So, and that's the problem.
What has happened? And I thought this was interesting. Is if you think about what came after, the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, came the Enlightenment, which elevated man to his reason to a high level, and then what you had come in after that with Darwinism was naturalism,
Yeah.
and then what a natural response to naturalism is nihilism.
Right.
Because naturalism, the only logical, consistent response to it is nihilism,
Right.
which is completely depressing and meaningless. So the existentialists in the mid 20th century responded. Yes. Existentialism was a response to nihilism, saying every man has a purpose, or every man is only what he makes of himself. So therefore, make something of yourself.
Right, because that's your purpose for being, is to make something.
And so here's where the faith of science comes in. So the faith of science, and that's what it is. It basically took this and grabbed it and went with it. The faith of science is that they believe in unobservable, unseen processes. Yes. Like, let me change that. Not the faith of real science.
Right.
The faith of Bill Nye science, yes, or Lawrence Krauss science, or even Richard Dawkins, because he does some good things,
sure,
some good scientific things, but then he gets into unobservable, unseen processes, unseen transitional forms, unseen infinite universes that they just throw out there, unseen, unobservable beneficial mutations, which produce new information somehow. We've never observed that, and we never will. Unseen, unnatural origins of things coming to life from nothing. Unseen stars blowing up to form everything that we knew. Yeah. No, Neil deGrasse. Yeah. They believe in miracles. That's basically what I just said. If they believe that, they believe in miracles.
Absolutely.
And it's actually more of a mythology than anything.
It absolutely is a mythology, but we're not allowed to say that. And why are we not allowed to say that? Because they tell us we're not allowed to say that. Which is exactly what they accuse Christians and other religions of doing. Of saying you're not allowed to question my authority. My authority is law. Instead of the authority coming from God, their authority comes from their natural reasoning, which is supposedly superior to ours. And where did they? And they're like, well, no, I have a PhD, but where did you get this PhD from? Other people, other men,
Right.
whose reasoning you say are more intelligent than ours, and so you have literally created, and what you have seen created through the education system, through the modern system of scientific study, this hierarchy that is very similar to a religious hierarchy. It is you have PhDs, you've got scientists, you've got heads of certain organizations, you've got teachers, whatever, and they go down in order of structure. The same way that you have a pope and a bishop and a priest and a pastor. You know what I'm saying? It is exactly the same thing. It is a structure of people who tell us what we are supposed to know, and that they are in now obviously we don't believe that in the non-denominational Christian world, but if you're going by the Catholic or the strictly religious sense of the word of Christianity, it's the same thing. They tell us what the Bible says and what God says. Scientists tell us what is real about the universe, even if they have no proof, but simply because 98% of them agree on it. And we're supposed to believe them because they're smarter than we are.
Well, if you look at science in the past, I mean, here's what I always tell people when they talk about, well, look at all these scientists who believe in evolution and believe in are atheist, and it's like, well, look at these Nobel Prize winning scientists who are creationists, who are Christians, who, so if you're talking about IQ makes right, or even the majority makes right, because everybody used to think that the universe was eternal.
You talk about the flat earthers too.
Yeah, and then you got, but science has been proved wrong on many things, and it's supposed to. If you have a theory, you're supposed to test it. So we're not supposed to accept it as absolute truth, which is what they do. But contrast the faith of science, the faith that scientists have, in proving that beneficials, mutations produce new information, stuff like that,
right,
to the faith of theistic scientists, which it's rooted in evidence of a rational, well-ordered universe. We can observe that we can know things rationally and truly because of an intelligent cause that created us to search and know truth and purpose, not randomness and meaninglessness, because even these scientists who will say we're meaningless, we're absolutely cold, live in a cold, indifferent universe, and it's meaningless, and it's fascinating though, and science is glory. No, they believe in a rational intelligence and a well-ordered universe.
Yes.
You have to do science.
Well, absolutely, and it's the study of that natural universe. That's what science is the study of the natural world. Well, and again, this is where Christianity, for instance, and what we believe to be truth, we believe in a supernatural as well as a physical. So if they are two parts of a whole, you cannot completely understand one without the other. And even, let's get back to hypothesis, because they talk about gravity, for instance. Well, I guess if you don't believe in evolution, you must not believe in gravity. No, I believe in gravity because if I drop something, it falls. I don't necessarily believe in gravity or in how gravity works because you tell me, because E equals mc squared, a lot of people don't think that's a flawed system. That's a flawed equation. Because the reason why it's flawed is because it doesn't apply to the quantum realm. So gravity only applies, as far as E equals mc squared, to the massive. It does not apply to the quantum. So if that's the case, how do you really know how gravity works or why it works?
Right.
See, that's the problem. You're telling me that it works a specific way because you say it does, but you can't necessarily prove that to some degree. Yes, obviously, we do understand through the laws of thermodynamics and different laws that gravity does work. So, for instance, if we throw an object towards Jupiter, it's gonna naturally gravitate towards Jupiter. Why? Because of its gravity. But what is the process that causes that? Why? They really can't prove, or they really don't exactly know, because they assume it's because it's big, and so therefore, because it's big, it has more gravity than something that is smaller. So something that is smaller will naturally gravitate towards that. But what is the reasoning? Well, according to E equals mc squared, it's bending of space-time. So in other words, all of space and time is flat like a piece of paper. So when you put something heavy in a piece of paper, the paper bows. So if you put things on the outskirts of that, they're going to naturally fall towards that bow. And so that's their theory of why gravity works. But they can't prove that necessarily.
Right. And here's the thing: is with science, the way it's supposed to be viewed. It used to be actually when you studied a science other than theology, you studied something lower. Anything beneath theology, everything was beneath theology. But we can't be overly skeptical about science and hold it to a standard of like perfect knowledge.
Of course.
But the problem is those who defend science must also realize that they elevate it to a level of superior knowledge.
Yes.
Where they hold the keys to all evidence and all ethics and all wisdom.
And
so you can't inflate science and then get mad when someone questions your conclusions. All we're doing is questioning certain things.
But that's the definition of science. That's how science is the questioning of everything.
And not only that, but it's interpretations of things in the distant past that you can't observe today, and they want to say, no, this is absolute fact. Yeah.
Well, and it's even carbon dating, which they use as absolute fact, and everybody knows carbon dating isn't perfect, and it can actually be used. Really, you can't say for an absolute certainty that this they can give you a ballpark figure, but they can't actually give you an absolute certainty. And you'll actually carbon date. There've been plenty of instances where they'll carbon date something, and then someone else will carbon date it, and they'll get completely different readings. Like you had said when you were talking about why there was a flood, because people are like, oh, well, this rock is carbon dated 3 billion years ago, with the rock right next to it that was dug up together was carbon dated at just 1 million years ago. And you're like, well, what is that discrepancy? How could they be right next to each other and be from that far of a distance apart? And they don't have any explanation for that. Because
interestingly, some people might disagree with me, but when they dated these rocks or some of the moon rocks, one of them dated 20 billion years, and the scientists rejected that. They said, no, it can't be that old.
Exactly.
The next one dated like 18 billion, and they were like, oh, that can't be that old. Then the next one dates like 200 million, and then they found one that dated 4.2 billion years, and they said, that's right on. But most people don't hear that. You have to have like a former scientist, that observed this, because it's not going to make it out. You're not going to hear about these dating discrepancies.
And this is why you can't preach this stuff as truth. And that's the problem. If it is a closed system where we have no ability to understand and see the processes, but that we must, for instance, how many times have I heard people say, explain it to me, or I've said even, explain it to me, well, you wouldn't understand it. Or they just start spouting stuff off that you don't understand. And they accuse religion of doing that. Well, religion will say, well, you just don't understand. Well, and I can't really explain it to you because you just don't understand. And someday when you accept Jesus Christ, you'll spiritually be able to understand it. And is there some truth to God opening up your eyes to things? Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is that really you can understand it. You really can understand. Whether you choose to accept it or not is completely different. But when somebody tells you that you will not be able to understand it, so therefore they can't explain it to you, well, that gives me a red flag.
Well, the thing is, what they've done is we can understand somewhat. We can understand evolution in the way Darwin observed it, which was adaptations.
Yes.
But one of the false narratives is that evolution is science.
Yes.
Because this is how they indoctrinate kids in school with this bait and switch technique. For example, they showed what Darwin observed in different creatures and adapting over time.
Right.
Their beaks, maybe something else, not some species becoming another species, but adaptations over time. And they show kids these things, and then they say, you see here, this is evolutionary science, how if you just add in 400 million years here, you can see how a whale could eventually become a cow, over a long, long period of time. And so we've never observed a mutation add any new information to DNA, nor has a mutation ever benefited an organism. So if you ask an evolutionist this, they'll tell you a story about how something happened in this situation or could have happened or the probability of it might happening. That's not science. So
No, it's
that's,
not. And
but that's what the kids learn,
right. And you
and that's
get,
how they go in.
if you disagree with them or question them, you get an ad hominem, how do you say that? Argument. In other words, then they'll attack you as a person, which you experienced when you were in college, and I did to some degree as well. If you question them, you're immediately attacked as, oh, well, you believe some guy, beard wearing guy up in the sky created the universe, and you probably don't believe in gravity either.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
and that's an ad hominem argument, which most people who use that argument mean they don't have an answer for you, or they'll, like you had said, and we
Or they'll
both
say,
experience, they'll ask you a question
Right.
to deflect the question you ask them.
They'll deflect it so that, yeah. And here's the thing, Jay, if Darwin was right, you'll probably understand it all in a few million years.
Right. Thank you for listening to the Christian Sages podcast and our new episode, Science as a Religion. Due to the length of this episode, it has been cut up into 3 different episodes, and this is episode 1. Episode 2 will be following up next. Thank you for staying tuned, and hope you enjoy. God bless.